seeing kind of what's going on in our lives in a more public way than I think we ever intended life to be, though it's a good thing. And so I'll start kind of at the middle of December. As you guys know, we have, well, some of you know, we've struggled with our son, Cameron. He has struggled to make good, wise decisions about his life and kept kind of running into speed bumps. And I think this started about 8th grade for him. He was 13 years old at the time. He is 17 and a half now. And so we've been dealing with this for about 4 years, trying to figure out, get to the bottom of what's going on, help him, walk through it with him, and love him the best way that we know how. And I think at first we thought that life was just hitting regular teenage speed bumps, and we were all going to lean into that and make the wisest choices possible and have a relationship with this kid. And we have experienced a wonderful relationship with him, despite the way that life has been a little bit off the rails. It left us actually seeking drug and alcohol treatment for him 2 summers ago, and we shared that with you guys. But what kept happening is he would make choices that we were like, that doesn't make sense, and we would talk to him about it, and it still didn't make any sense. And that sent us down a road of realizing that he had a brain injury at 13 years old playing football, a pretty severe concussion. And in seeking out help for him, we found he did have brain damage that showed up on brain scans in 2 frontal lobes of his brain, as well as a spot on the top. And if you guys know the function of the brain, it's a crazy thing and nobody really knows, but part of what they do know is that it is that frontal lobe of the brain is in charge of decision making and regulating emotions. And we really saw that that was the heart of a lot of what he was struggling with. So we were getting help for him, and along the road in December, and this is going pretty fast, but in December, shortly before Christmas, he had an episode that we would say felt like mania. It was just really rapid. His choices were rapid. Things weren't making sense. He was doing really good things, but at really high rates, and it wasn't. So we took him into a hospital at the advice of our pediatrician, and they admitted him to Children's Hospital, and he was there for 6 days. And they weren't quite sure what was going on, but they basically released him because in the state of Washington, kids get to make their own choices about their health care starting at 13 years old. And so he can't be held there despite what everybody, professionals and parents, think would be the best for him. So he came home shortly before Christmas, and we were all home together. And a day after Christmas, later at night, we came home to him being very altered. And we called 911 and had an ambulance come and take him back to Children's Hospital. He had overdosed on Benadryl. So he still didn't want to be there, and they made us take him home. You can only keep him for 72 hours on a parent-directed hold. And on our way home, on a Tuesday afternoon, we got a call when we were almost home saying he has plans to kill himself today, and he's shared that with people here, some young people that he's been talking with, and you need to bring him back. And so we turned right back around and took him back, and 72 hours later, same story. He's planning to kill himself, but we can't keep him here. And for him, he was explaining that he's afraid of what he's feeling, afraid of people looking at him like he's mentally ill, and nobody knows in what's going on, and that's a very scary thing. And for him, the solution was to just stop hurting everybody and hurting our family and just end it. And as much as we begged him for that to not be the solution, it was his resolve. And so 2 Saturdays ago, I had to kick in a bathroom door to get to my kid, who I knew was taking pills on the other side of the door, and Jason called 911, and we had police and ambulance and everything flooding through our home, and it happened so very quickly that our heads were spinning. And He was at Providence Hospital then in Everett because they didn't have time to get him to Seattle. And so he stayed there for a week. And I was sharing I have leadership camp friends, and you guys have heard me talk about that before, that I spend every summer with for the last 20 plus years. I've been there. And they were just saying, how's Cam? Because they've been on this journey with us too, and love him, and he's been a part of their lives as well. And I just shared, we're at the end, we've called everyone we know to call, and everybody says, get him out of Washington, where he can't make that choice for himself. And so I said, but we can't do that. Our insurance doesn't pay for things outside of here. We don't even know where we would go. And quite honestly, Jason and I were so tired of phone call after phone call after phone call, spending 45 minutes sharing the same story, at the end of it getting the same answer. I'm very sorry. There is nothing we can do for you. So these women are movers and shakers, and they basically said, can we have permission to pick up the baton for you where you stopped? And I said, absolutely, we're desperate. And they just started getting on the phone, and they started calling places, and they found a treatment center in California that they thought might be a good fit, 2 of them actually, and Jason made a call on Monday morning, and we were like, this seems really great, but it's expensive, and we can't do that. It is over $40,000 plus we have to travel there, and we have to go there once a week, and that really isn't doable for us. And so thank you so much, but we just can't. And they said, we are not going to let money be the thing that kills your kid. So he's going, we'll figure it out. And they booked a flight for us on Tuesday. Was it Tuesday? Wednesday. They booked a flight for us on Wednesday. And we picked Cameron up at 5 o'clock in the morning and white-knuckle drived to the airport, hoping that we made it there without bolting. He knew where we were going, and his position in all of this, he found out about they put together a GoFundMe campaign, and it started being shared on Facebook. And I know that that's how many of you know of the story, because you've been really generous on our behalf. And as we looked at it, we were just like blown away that I would say that there felt like there was hope where hope had absolutely been gone, that there was something to do when everyone was telling us that there was nothing to do. And so we went down to California. Cam, unfortunately, had his phone in the hospital. I don't know why they let them have their phones, but whatever. And he saw the campaign on Facebook, and he texted us very quickly and said, I don't want that. I don't want people to be doing that. I'm fine. I just want to come home. And so we sat and talked with him, and we just said, people love you, like really love you. And this is not about people loving me and Dad. This is about the way that you've walked in the world, and you've done great things, and people believe in you, and they believe that there's more, and we just have to find out what's going on. And he cried about that, cried about the love that he felt from that, cried about the shame as well of it, and it's really humbling. It's really humbling for us to be in this spot. I cannot imagine how humbling it must be for him as well. And so he seemed optimistic about this place that we went to in California. He's in Malibu. The people there are wonderful. Every place we've taken him has been very institutional, which means essentially we're staring at you, we're watching every move, and don't you dare mess up.
Rubber rooms and white coats.
Yeah. And that was making him sicker and sicker and sicker, and we watched it progress. And we're like, this isn't helping, but our home is not a safe place to be. We have no other alternative. And we walked into this home where there are 10 kids there, co-ed, that are functioning as a beautiful family, that warmly welcomed him. A guy who oversees it said to Cam, hey, just so you know, we're getting to know you. We're going to hang out with you a lot, like 24 hours a day for the first little while that you're here. Not, well, you're on suicide watch. Give me your shoelaces and your belts. It was just come and be a part of what we have here, and we're going to do some hard work together, and you're going to link arms with all these people here that are doing hard work as well. So that's where he is. What else do I say?
I don't know. I didn't add a lot of color.
Okay. Right?
But I'm just up here because, I'm the good-looking one. So
Arm candy. Here's what I will say. Those are the facts. Here are the feelings. We're humbled. We have hope, a glimmer of hope where it was gone. We feel loved. It solidifies for us that life is meant to be lived in community and not alone, because we feel that. This has been a hard month, a really hard month. We feel God with us. He is not distant. He's there. He's there in really little ways, and I think in ways that give peace that doesn't make sense. If I looked at it from the outside, I couldn't explain the peace that I feel. I think one thing I'm learning in this is I don't have control of other people's choices, even though I really like to have control in a lot of situations. But God is in control of me. And no matter the outcome, because I have had to stare at a really hard outcome and realize that might be my reality, that God will be present in it. And that the pain and the suffering that we feel here is nothing compared to the eternity that God has shaped for us. And he will be as good and as loving and as kind to me and my son and our family as he possibly can, and we rest in that. And those aren't just cliche words that we're saying. They're like the truth that is the anchor for our souls right now. And so I'm thankful that I have a God who's big, that's arms reach are wider than mine could ever be, and that he will bring beauty out of this, even if it's not how I hope it turns out. So.
Yeah, for me, there's just been this long season of frustration and sadness, and you guys have been amazing in the midst of this. Some of you have known about this for a while. Some of them you were just kind of found out this last week. Some of you, you're just finding out right now, but life is meant to be lived in community, especially when you have a really good one. And we are so thankful for the way that you guys have wrapped around us and the way that people have wrapped around us and not made us feel ashamed of the situation, but just loved us. And so he's in a spot now where we feel like there is a glimmer of hope that he could respond to this. This is a situation and an environment and a type of therapy that we think he could respond to. So if you're asking what can we do, please pray for him. These next 25 to 35 days are going to be huge in his life, one way or the other. And if he gets done with this and they haven't had a breakthrough with him, we're in a really dark place. But if he can begin to understand some things about himself and they can make a breakthrough, it's amazing what's possible. And when somebody gets going in the right direction, they can get going in the right direction so fast. And you know him. He's such a gifted, kind kid. Yeah, so please pray for him. All right. Well, on to the sermon. Sure. I know that just happened like a week ago at the end of church, but yeah, that'd be great. Bob, you can't have the idea and then... So I will say it's a little weird to even have a sermon in the middle of this, But as I was prepping this week and thinking about what I'm about to talk about, I really believe God has something to say to many of you. And it might be a gentle whisper. It might be a smack in the face. And so let me just pray real quick for that. God, would you meet us here this morning? We're all coming in here with different stuff and different life issues. And God, we need you and we need your guidance. And this morning I pray you would give it to us. I pray that you would speak personally to us. And I pray that each of us would walk out of here knowing that we had met with you in some way this morning. So would you speak? Help us to listen in Jesus' name. Amen. So we started this series last week called Breathing Room. And if you weren't here, I'm going to catch you up real quick. This is a series about doing some breathing. It's about room and building some room to breathe into life. Some space into all of the demands that we have on us and some margin. And we're defining breathing room this way. Breathing room is the space between our current pace and our limits. It's the space, the gap between our current pace and our limits. So how fast we're going, how busy our schedules are, how many commitments we have, how many relationships we're trying to maintain, how much we're spending, and then our limits. Because relationally, financially, in terms of your time, you have limits, right? You have money limits, you have time limits, you have energy limits. And if you try to live without any space between your pace and your limits, after a while, you're going to stop enjoying life. So we talked about some of what happens when there's no breathing room. And let me just kind of sum that up real quick. When we said that when there's no breathing room, stress levels go up. Right? They go up. If you live right at the edge of your limit, it's stressful. You know this. It is stressful. Another thing that happens is our focus narrows. So when there's no space between your pace and your limits, you get consumed with whatever happens to be right in front of you. You fall victim to the tyranny of the urgent because you don't have time or space to step back and kind of look at the bigger issues of life. So you just kind of try to make it through each day. Tackle this thing that happens to be right in front of you right now. And then as a result, without room to breathe, another thing that happens is relationships suffer. It's like, Mom, you're always on the phone. Dad, you're always on the computer. You guys are always arguing about money. Or honey, I feel like your body's here, but where is your mind? You're not with me. I don't feel like you're listening. And without breathing room, relationships suffer. Now, here's the cool thing, and we started to see this last week, that God cares about this very much. He intends for us to find a pace of life that includes breathing room. And so today we're going to dive into a very specific passage. And we're going to look at one big idea about managing time, about managing our lives. And there's just going to be like one application, and it is so simple. But I believe that if we own this and we latch onto it and we understand it, this can literally change the way we live our lives. And you go, that's pastor talk. It is, but it can. And so today's wisdom comes from kind of an unusual and really cool place. It comes from the Psalms, which is not that unusual. But usually when we think of the Psalms, we think of who? David. Yeah, we think of David because David was this incredible poet and musician, and he lived this amazing life, and so he wrote all these worship songs, these psalms. But today's psalm is actually written by Moses, and it came hundreds of years before David. And this psalm is all about time. It's about organizing time. This is Psalm 90. And Moses, it turns out, had a very unique insight into time because Moses lived a very long life. Moses lived to be 120. And we're told that it was a healthy 120. We're told that even at the end, and this is just one of those weird details in Scripture, we're told that even at the end, Moses could still see really well. And you have to think, okay, that's not because he had contacts or glasses, right? This is not because he had LASIK surgery. And so that's pretty impressive. I think that's pretty impressive because most of us are like, when we hit about 40, we're just like, 120, man. Now we hear that, right? When there's a skeptic in us, it goes, 120, really? But I just want to say, you have to remember, he ate organic his whole life. And so, there's no pollution, I'm just saying. Actually, that's not my theory, okay? That's lame. But he was 120, which apparently at the time was pretty old because he talks in this psalm about 70 or 80 being kind of a long, full life. But Moses had a very unique perspective about time, not just because he lived a long life, but because over the course of his 120 years, it's like he lived 4 different lives. 4 just distinctly different seasons of life. Okay, life number 1. Moses was raised in Pharaoh's household, okay, the king of Egypt, even though he was a Hebrew, he was Jewish. And I'm not going to get into the whole story, but he was raised in luxury. Okay, he was raised as an adopted son of the king, the richest, most powerful man on earth at the time. So that's life number 1. And then things took a turn because he got outside the palace eventually, and he saw the slavery of his own people. He saw the way his people were being mistreated and living in bondage. And one day he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew almost to death, and he got so infuriated he murdered the Egyptian. And suddenly Moses was a fugitive in Egypt. And so he fled. And so for the second season of his life, like life number 2, he lived in exile from Egypt. And this next season of his life, what did he do for a vocation? What was he? A shepherd. And you talk about a whole different deal, and you want to talk about some slow days. Okay, today I take the sheep out, and I sit. And I watch the sheep. And I watch the sun go across the sky. And then I round them up. And I take them back to the pen. And the next morning, I do it all again. And again. And again. And again. For 40 years. 40 years as a shepherd. And the thing that we need to kind of get our minds around about this is that Moses didn't know his own story. We're like, well, don't worry, Moses, cool stuff's happening. It's going to come, right? He doesn't know that. As far as he's concerned, this is his whole life. He's going to live the rest of his life as a shepherd. He's thinking like, this is it. I watch the sheep die, and then I die. Oh, maybe I'll have a few kids. Maybe I'll have some grandkids, but then I die, and after about 2 generations or so, nobody's going to remember my name. He had no idea what was coming next. And so that was the second part of his life. Then comes life number 3, season number 3. He meets God in the burning bush, and suddenly he ends up back in Egypt fighting for justice. And it's the whole let my people go thing. And there's all these miracles and all this crazy stuff. And Moses is at the political epicenter of all of it. And you know the story. The Hebrews are eventually liberated from Egypt. And that starts life number 4. Suddenly, Moses is the leader of this massive nomadic nation, like more than 1 million people. And they march out of Egypt toward the promised land. And what was awesome about it was the people were so happy and content, right? Yeah, not so much, because it turns out life in the desert's hard. And so the people almost immediately, they just start murmuring and complaining about Moses and about God. And God looks at it and he says, you know what? I'm not going to let these people into the land. They're not worthy of it. I'm not going to lead this whole generation. I'm going to let this whole generation die off first. And then here's what I'll do. I'll take their children into the land. So Moses, here's what you're going to do. You're going to lead them around and around and around in circles all through the desert for 40 years till they all die off. How's that sound? That's like worse than being a shepherd. I mean, it's so depressing. And so this is how Moses spends his last 40 years. At least he could see. So that's nice. But somewhere along the line, probably toward the end of his life, Moses sits down and he writes a worship song, Psalm 90. And in the song, he has incredible perspective on time. So let me read these verses to you. It's a large passage and we'll kind of fly through it. It's a little bit tricky. This is ancient text. It's written in Hebrew, of course, and it's translated into English. But here's what Moses wrote. He's going to give us some context, and then at the end, he's going to give us a very powerful punchline, and that's going to be our thing for today. So here we go. he kind of sets this up. He says, Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. In other words, God, you are home to all mankind, whether we recognize it or not. You are our home. You have always been our home. Before the mountains were born, that's kind of cool imagery. Before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. He says, you are God everlasting. You are everlasting to everlasting. In other words, the arrows of time just go infinitely in both directions. He's like, God, you have no beginning and you have no end. And somewhere in between the bookends of everlasting to everlasting, there's me, Moses. And there's us, the nation of Israel. Everlasting to everlasting, and then pause, here we are. And then he makes this this is kind of a cool statement. I love this. He says, you turn people back to dust, saying, return to dust, you mortals. Is that like just the greatest Gandalf statement in the whole Old Testament? Return to dust, you mortals, like you shall not pass, right? Now we don't, we don't talk like that, so I was like, that's kind of weird. But this is ancient Hebrew poetry, and this is poetic expression. And Moses is simply acknowledging that God controls the beginnings and the ends, that God controls or has input into the days of our lives. Now, we struggle to understand how this works. It's like, does that mean God determines when and how we're all going to die? Like, does God cause all that? I don't know. Is it more that God just knows in advance how many days we're going to live? Or does he decide how many days we're going to live? I don't know. But here's what's important in this. I think most of you, whether you recognize it or not, whether you can explain it or not, because none of us can explain this very well, but most of us believe that God has something to do with the length of our lives. And I'll show you what I mean. If you found out tomorrow that you have a terminal disease, would you pray? Or if you found out that someone you love has a terminal disease, would you pray? And for some of you, that's like the most ridiculous, dumb question. You're like, of course I'd pray. But even if you're here, because this isn't everybody, even if you're here and you're not somebody who prays, you haven't prayed in a long time. And you might say, you know what, I'm not a religious person at all. I'm not even sure what I think about the whole God thing. Let me ask you a question. In that scenario, would you pray? And if you say yes, let me just point out that intrinsically there is just something in us where most of us intuitively believe that God has something to do with the number of our days. So Moses continues. He says, 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night. And a watch in the night was about a 3-hour period. In other words, this is Moses' way of saying, God, you know how I keep saying, wow, the years are flying by. Okay, God, think about how they fly by for you. God, the older I get, the faster the years go, but you, God, are like everlasting to everlasting. So time must like really fly for you. For you, 1,000 years is like a day. And so in light of that, God, to you, how long is the span of my life, really? Like my whole life that is just this huge deal to me. It must be going by in a flash for you. Like, wow, how short is my life from your perspective? He goes on. Yet you sweep people away in the sleep of death. They are like the new grass of the morning. In the morning it springs up new, but by evening it is dry and withered. Isn't this inspirational and motivational? Aren't you glad you came to church today? Moses is like, look, our lives, they come and go like grass. He says, our days may come to 70 years or 80 if our strength endures, yet the best of them are but trouble and sorrow, for they quickly pass and we fly away. How many of you know the song, I'll Fly Away? I love that song, and this is where it comes from, right here. And the idea is that this life is short, and so much of it is filled with pain and hardship, because this world is not the way God intended it. It's not the way he designed it. And Moses knew all about this, right? 40 years tending sheep. And then things pick up, and they're exciting for like just a little while, and then 40 years shepherding the like biggest complainers on earth. It's just, you look at it and go, man, that's tough. And then the next verse comes in, it's kind of confusing. It's kind of hard to translate into English, but this is the NIV version of it. It says, if only we knew the power of your anger. Your wrath is as great as the fear that is your due. Y'all got that? It seems like a poorly constructed sentence. Like it's too many ideas and then some words got left out. But this is like ancient Hebrew poetry translated to English. So rather than trying to break it down or explain it, let me just give you kind of the gist of what it means. Take a shot at it. Moses is basically saying, if we could see God as he is, we would give him the reverence he is due. If we could see God as he is, we would give him the reverence he is due. He's in the middle of this discussion, right? And he's going, God, you are everlasting to everlasting. I'm like a piece of grass. I'm here today and gone tomorrow. And then Moses pauses in the middle of this thought and he says, wow, God, if we could see you as you are, then we would give you the awe that you are due. Maybe another way of thinking of this or saying it is this. If we could see God as he is, we would be more careful with the time we've been allotted. If we could see God as he is, see our lives as they are, and see time the way God sees it, we'd be a whole lot more careful with our time. But we don't think like this, with this kind of context. We don't think of time in the context of like eternity, right? The context of my life is my life. But Moses pauses here to say, actually, God, the context of my life is everlasting to everlasting. And in the context of that, he's saying, God, my life is extremely short. And so Moses now comes to the application, and this is kind of what we're going to camp on today, because this is a huge idea if we let it kind of make its way in. He says, teach us to number our days. Teach us to number our days. Another way of saying it is this. Teach us, God, to live as if our days are numbered. Because see, sometimes we live as if we're going to live forever. We live as if we're always going to have our kids. We live as if we're always going to have our spouse. We live as if we're always going to have our parents. We're always going to have our friends. We're always going to have this moment. See, we can live as if time is unlimited, and we know it's not. But in terms of how we schedule, like how we prioritize, the things we make time for, the things we leave no time for, sometimes we live as if our days are not numbered. And then he finishes the thought. He says, teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. So if we live as if our days are numbered, then it's like we start to understand what should fill our days. Or another way of saying it is this: remembering our time is limited helps us to know how to spend our limited time. And that's like a summary of the entire passage. Maybe you could even shrink it down more. Okay, you could say, my time is limited, so I need to limit how I spend my time. Now, when it comes to money, we all understand this, right? It's pretty intuitive. My money is limited, so I need to limit how I spend my money. But when it comes to time, this is just as true, maybe even more so. My time is limited, so I need to limit how I spend my time. Okay, now, I am going to talk about something really interesting. And I know some of you are like, good. Because I'm wondering, like, how much longer is this going to take? My time is limited, and so I need to limit how I spend my time. So, like, pick it up, dude. Okay, I will. This is about to get interesting. And so I just want to say, if you tuned out for a second, tune back in. I also want to say, if you're watching this online, because you were, like, in Hawaii on Sunday, or your Super Bowl party had to take all day, but you have life group like 45 minutes from now, and you got to cram in the sermon online so you can talk about it. I just want to say, if you have sort of tuned out, like if you're doing online shopping right now while the message is playing, close those boxes and come back for a second, because this is about to get interesting. I'm about to fast forward to the end of your life. And you are going to gain some invaluable wisdom. And if you take this wisdom that many people really don't see until the end, and you bring it into the current season of your life, it can do amazing things to maximize your time. There is an Australian hospice nurse named Bronnie Ware. Have any of you ever heard of Bronnie Ware? No? Okay. So she's a hospice nurse, and as a hospice nurse, she spends time with men and women at the end. And she has walked people, like hundreds and hundreds of people, through their final days. And in that time with them, she started asking them questions. She just became inquisitive and wanted dialogue and started asking questions. And among those questions, she would inevitably at some point ask them, what are your biggest regrets? Do you have any regrets? And she did this over and over with men and women over the years. And she started to recognize, as she would have these conversations, that certain patterns were emerging. There were some very common regrets that people have. And so she wrote a book called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. Now, we're not going to take time to go through all 5 of them. Some of you might want to buy the book for yourself. But I want to give you the top 2 regrets that dying people have, because this is a big deal. I think this is helpful to know. This might be good to know before you're at the end. And I'm going to give you the second one first, and then I'll give you the top one second. Okay, so the second most common regret is this, number 2. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. And I think that could be rephrased, I wish I hadn't worked so much. Or maybe I wish I hadn't put so much of my best energy into working. Now, this is not earth-shaking, right? You can imagine that this would be a common regret. But let me read for you what she writes about it, because I think this is powerful. She writes, "This came from every male patient that I nursed. Every single man said, I wish I had not worked so hard. They missed their children's youth and their partner's companionship." She says women also spoke of this regret, but as most of them were from an older generation, many of the female patients had not been breadwinners, which makes sense. But she says, all of the men I nursed deeply regretted spending so much of their lives on the treadmill of a work existence. And I would say this applies to all of us, for sure, but I just want to say, guys, men, if we don't learn to number our days, we will misspend our time and we will misspend our life, and we will have a very avoidable regret at the end. Because when you think you have all the time in the world with your kids, you think you have all the time in the world with your spouse, you think you have all the time in the world with those that you love most, someday you won't have all the time in the world anymore. And what's so hard and so sad is you can't go back. You only get to be 20, you only get to be 20 once. Right? You only get to be 30 once. You get to be 40 a couple times. I keep doing this thing over and over. It's been awesome. It's totally working. You don't get to go back and do it again. And here's why this is a big deal. This came as the second most common regret from people who are facing the reality that their days are numbered and they can't go back and their time is running out. And if they could give you and me wisdom, if they could reach out to us and give us wisdom, they would say this: don't spend too much of your life on your work. But this is easy to do, and we do it, and we get sucked into it. And I think there are lots of reasons why, especially for men. Part of it is we get our identity from it. We do. We get our identity from it. We think this is what's valuable about me. This is what matters about me. We get extra income from it, which is nice. We can improve our lifestyle from it. We can achieve a ton. We can feel worthwhile from it. We can get appreciation from it that we may not get at home. I mean, let's face it, it's not that normal for your 6-year-old to give you a promotion. I don't know, maybe some of you have a gold watch from your 10-year-old. I don't. So, you being dad, like being husband, being mom, being wife, oftentimes it doesn't give you the same accolades that you can get elsewhere. You don't get all the attaboys. You don't get all the attagirls. But you listen to the people at the end and they say, man, I wish I had not worked so hard. That doesn't have to be you, but you better number your days. Okay, now I want to get to the number one regret. And before I mention it, I want to say the younger you are, the more you need to tune in for this. Because the younger you are, the more you have time to work on this one. And the more you can let this one actually impact your life and your days. Here's the most common regret people had. Number one, I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others, my parents, my friends, my coworkers, my neighbors, the culture expected of me. Because that's like huge. And she writes, here's what she writes. She says, this was the most common regret of all. When people realize that their life is almost over and look back clearly on it, it is easy to see how many dreams have gone unfulfilled. Most people had not honored even a half of their dreams and had to die knowing that it was due to choices they had made. They had made those choices. And she adds this, and I think this is so true and this is so huge. She says, health brings a freedom very few realize until they no longer have it. So this is the wisdom that comes at the end. And the question for us is like, okay, what do we do with that? Well, what do I do when I look at the current pace of my life? What do I do with that when I realize that there's very little space between my current pace and my limits? Just like, Lord, give us the wisdom that comes from living as if our days are numbered. Because my days are limited, God, help me to limit how I spend my days. Now, we can hear that and easily start to have pushback, right? Some of you have got pushback. I know you do. And we're just like, but, for instance, we think, but if I don't do as much as I possibly can, I'll never make it. Big question for you. What's it? I don't know. I don't know, but I won't make it. Well, here's what the people Bronnie Ware spent time with would say. You better make darn sure you have chosen the right it. Because you can spend your whole life trying to make it and then realize one day when it's too late that you have been pursuing the wrong it. And let's be honest, most of us are so busy trying to make it that we never stop to think about it. So before you cram your life full of things, you better know what it is for you. And let me tell you where it probably came from for most of you. I would bet that for most of you, it came from your parents. Because they were massively successful and now you're trying to live up to that. Or they were massively failures and you don't want to be like them. Okay? Or they were massively in the middle and they were boring. Like, you can't win with parents, right? I mean, just so you know, those of you that are parents, your kids they're gonna be in counseling because of you no matter what. But no matter how you grew up, let's face it, you're totally scarred. And if you're trying to make it, you better get your mind around what it is. What is it for you? Where did it come from? Do you really have the right it? There's another one. Maybe you think, but if I don't do as much as I possibly can, I will fall behind. Okay, that's legit. Fall behind who? Like, fall behind what? Like, what in our culture has so thoroughly dictated to you that this is how it has to be, that it drives your schedule? I don't want my kids to fall behind. Fall behind what? Honey, I don't want us to fall behind. I don't want to fall behind. I don't want to fall behind. I don't want to fall behind. I want to keep up. Keep up with who? Keep up with what? And you should answer that question if this is going to be something that drives your life. Like, teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Or how about this one? If I don't do as much as I possibly can, I will be poor. Now listen, for some of you, okay, not for all of you, but for some of you, this is like a big deal. Like, if you look inside of yourself, this is a big deal. The fear of becoming poor just drives you. But what does that even mean? Because maybe you've never even stopped to define poor. And yet, within you, there is this lurking feeling, and it could be something that was ingrained in you when you were growing up, or maybe it's something that you heard somewhere and the tape just plays over and over, or maybe it's something that you've seen and you don't want that. But maybe you're pouring your time or your life into a pace that is right on the edge because of a fear that you've never even stopped to name. A fear that's so vague you don't even know what poor is. And I just want to say, does that really make sense? Teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Or one more. If I don't do as much as I possibly can, I won't measure up. Okay. Measure up to what? Measure up to who? And you just think this morning, like, what is it that's driving you? What is it that really drives you? Because it's possible that if you're not careful and if you don't pause, if you don't answer some really fundamental questions, you could get to the stage of your life where you lose your health and you don't have any more choices. You don't have any more choices. And you've spent your whole life chasing something that you never even stopped to define. Now, if you're a follower of Jesus, okay, if you believe in a personal God, a God who is involved in your life and cares about you and has a plan for you, do you understand like how extraordinarily important this is? Because God has something he wants for you. He wants something, there's something he wants you to do, and if you're not careful, you can miss it. Because instead, people will determine for you what your life should be about. What needs to be in and what needs to be out and what needs to be given priority. See, God has something for you. He has something for your family. He has something for your kids. He's got something for your friends and all of that. God has something very specific for you if you're still single. Because you may not believe this, you have more flexibility with your time. But you can let it be taken away and you can let it be filled up by people who say, hey, this is how you should live your life. This is what you should be into. This is what you should do. This is what you should value. And God is looking at that and he's going, no. I want more for you. I want so much more for you. Now, to help you process this, we've got a little tool inside of your bulletin. So inside your bulletin, there's a little card that looks like, do we have that? It's not, it's in your bulletin. Yeah, that's okay. I still love you. Okay. No. Okay, well, on the card, if you can look at it, it starts with, what does it start with? Okay, and then there's a symbol. What's this? Plus. Okay. So there's a little plus, and I really want to encourage you guys to interact with this and to fill this out. And I also want to encourage you to talk to someone about it. Once you've kind of gotten some stuff written down, I'll explain what it all means in a minute. So if you're married, or if you're seriously dating somebody, or you have a good friend, or this could be somebody from work, whatever. But I just want to encourage you to not only do this exercise and write some stuff down, but to talk about it with someone when you're done. And I want to say, parents, you should talk about this with your kids. Kids, you should talk about this with your parents. So here's how this works. On the plus line, is that what you said is first? Okay, the plus, ask yourself, what do I need to add to my schedule that's not currently there? What do I need to add into my life and my schedule that's not currently there? And then on the minus line, what do I need to subtract from my schedule? Like remove completely. What do I need to add and what do I need to take out completely? So let me talk about the minus for just a second, because this one's tough. For some of you, you might need to put a name on that line. For some of you, you might need to put like a series of initials. Because if you're willing like to really look at your life, you'll see that there is somebody in your life right now who is stealing your life from you. And you know it. And your friends have told you, and your mom told you, and you've pushed back, and you're like, but they're a really nice person. And yet you know deep down, they're stealing your life. And it's not that they're a bad person, it's just that they aren't really good for you. They just eat up so much of your time. And there's nothing to show for it at the end. It might be a group of friends, might be a couple of couples. Maybe you're a couple and you hang out with other couples. And it's not that they're bad people. It's not that they're bad people. It's not that God doesn't love them. God loves them. But in terms of living as if your days are numbered, maybe for this season, okay, someone or a group of someone's has got to go. And then on the next line, there's the greater than sign. Is that what's next? How many of you know the difference between the greater than and the less than sign? This is a smart church. Okay, on the greater than sign, I want you to think and ponder something that you need more of. This is something that you already have, something that you already do, but something you need more of. And then on the last line, okay, the less than sign, something you need less of. Now, you can't take it out completely, okay? You just need less of it. So what do you need more of? What do you need less of? Now, maybe you don't need to get rid of your TV, but as a family, right, maybe you should spend a little less time on it. Or, I don't need to quit playing golf altogether, just less. And it's easy for me to pick on golf because I don't play golf. I used to, and I was obsessed, and so I gave it up years ago, and now I can pick on it. I don't hunt either. So some of you are like, man, what do you do? I don't know, actually. I don't have any hobbies. I think like my only hobby is coming and talking to you guys on Sundays. So don't be like me. My point is, take the time to do this and to fill this out and to spend some time thinking about it and to talk with someone about it. This can change your life. You don't want to get to the end having not taken time to do this. Because this exercise, if you take it seriously, it can be a life changer. And I want to say for those of you that are in life groups, I'm hoping that you will talk about this together as a group this week. I think that all of our groups have decided that the focus for these few weeks is going to be on this series. And so you're not studying something else right now. So I just want to encourage you, take this seriously. Dive into it, think about it, and talk about it when you get together with your group. Now here's why this is such a big deal. Your days are numbered. They are. Your time is limited. And so you want to spend as much time as possible doing the stuff that matters most. You do. And that means you need to think about what matters. And you want to spend as little time as possible doing the stuff that matters least. And here's what takes this to the deepest level, I think. And I just want to leave you with kind of what is, to me, a profound thought about this. God wants beautiful things for you more than you possibly know. God has dreams for you that are so stunningly amazing. He loves you, and He will guide you if you look to Him. It just like hit me and kind of overwhelmed me this week. This week I went into our office upstairs to talk to Jen, and she was gathering some images that could be used on the GoFundMe. The woman had said, hey, can you send me some images I could put up there? And so I got upstairs, And there was this image on the screen. So she looked at the screen and she looked at the image, and then she kind of turned around and she looked at me. And there was this kid that we loved, that we still love, that we just have loved. And she looked at the screen, she looked at me, we looked at each other, and then we just cried. And for some reason in that moment, there was so much emotion in this image for us with this kid, this boy. So we looked at the screen, we looked at each other, and then without saying anything, we just cried. And we cried because we love him so much. We cried because we have beautiful dreams for him. We cried because we want to see him made whole. And we know that this current season doesn't have to define him. It doesn't have to limit him. This season can be just a little blip, and we hope that it is, and we are praying that it is. But we so deeply want beautiful things for him because he's our boy. And we love him. And so it just occurred to me this week after that experience that, you know what, my Heavenly Father feels that same way about me. And he feels that way about you. And he's just trying to break through to us, going, do you understand? Do you know that I love you with a love that aches? Because he wants beautiful things for you more than you possibly know. So I just want to plead with you this morning. Let him guide you. Let him walk alongside of you. Trust in him and let him lead you, and follow him wherever he leads. Because if you trust him, he will lead you to beauty, and he will lead you to depth, and he will lead you to meaning. Oh God, teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom.